Welcome to Religion in the American Experience, a podcast that explores how religion has shaped America and how America has shaped religion, which can help us as we wrestle with complex questions of American governance and purpose in the 21st century. Here's your host, Chris Stevenson.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Religion in the American Experience, where we look carefully at how religion has shaped the country and how the country has shaped religion as we wrestle with difficult questions of governance and American purpose in the 21st century. Today, we are going to dip our toes into the vast topic of religion and American music by talking about Billie Holiday's life, times, and music through the lens of religion. And as always, as you know, our goal is that the time we spend together should make each of us more effective stewards of religion's role in the ongoing American experiment in self-government. Today, our guest is Tracy Fessenden. Professor Tracy Fessenden is the Steve and Margaret Forster Professor in the School of Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies at Arizona State University and Director of Strategic Initiatives in the Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict, where she also directs the Initiative in Spirituality and Public Life. Her work focuses on, among other things, but most relevant for our topic today, religion and American literature and the arts, and the relationship between religion and the secular in American law, culture, and public life. Tracy is the author of Religion Around Billie Holiday and Culture and Redemption, Religion, the Secular, and American Literature. Tracy, thank you so very much. We're indebted to you for sharing with us both your time and your extensive knowledge on this subject.
Thank you, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm going to begin by reading some of the introduction in your article called Billie Full of Grace, because it captures so well the topic. Here I go. Quote, "To consider a woman's Hall of Fame in American music is to come face to face with that music's debt to African American religious life. The biggest names in blues, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Ida Cox, all came up singing in the makeshift choirs of black churches in the South. What Billboard magazine first christened rock and roll were the holy roller hymns of gospel legend Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Billie Holiday made a single wry nod to gospel in God Bless the Child, and there's that spiritual that quotes a non-existent Bible verse. Holiday's is not a gospel voice, if by gospel we mean Aretha Franklin or Whitney Houston in full-throated, multi-octave flights of supplication and praise. Her style was not formed in church, if by church we mean the great variety of Afro-Protestant spaces that nurtured congregants' unquenchable aliveness in the face of racial terror and injustice. But for a scant year in early adolescence, just before or around the time she began singing in cabarets, Billie Holiday did sing in church, the Catholic chapel of a convent reformatory, the Baltimore House of the Good Shepherd for Colored Girls." Close quote. Tracy, could you give us a short bio of Billie Holiday, including how and when she ended up at Good Shepherd and when she left that religious place?
Sure. Yes, thank you. That piece you read was from an NPR series on great women in American music. And I wanted to pay tribute to the crucial role of the Black Protestant Church in American music and certainly in American women's contributions to that music. But that was not Billie Holiday's church. She was born in 1915 in Philadelphia, which was sort of an accident of geography. Her parents were very young people in Baltimore, and her mother was doing some traveling for some kind of work that she was doing and gave birth in Philadelphia. But Billie, whose name was Eleanor Harris, was quickly back in Baltimore with her mom. Her upbringing was pretty haphazard. And she ended up at age 10 in the House of the Good Shepherd for Colored Girls, which was a Catholic convent slash reform school slash orphanage run by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. And it was not unusual in her family, I guess, for this to be a place where a girl might spend some time. Her mother, Sadie, had actually spent almost 6 years in the House of the Good Shepherd herself. It was a Catholic institution, and it was one of the few for African American women and girls. So it was called the House of the Good Shepherd for colored girls. So Billie Holiday, whose mother worked at a number of jobs as a domestic, probably also as a sex worker, was not present in the way that she might have wanted to be for her daughter, and so she arranged, or other members of the family arranged for Eleanora then to be in the House of the Good Shepherd by the time she was about 10. She stayed there for maybe 10 months, left, and then was pretty much living on the street for the next year or so. Her mother was in and out of her life. And she was then returned to the House of the Good Shepherd, but this time under different circumstances. The House of the Good Shepherd had three, if you will, classes of inmate, as they were called. The preservate class, which were orphan kids, street kids, who ended up there because they lacked proper guardianship. Then there were girls who were sent there, girls and young women who were sent there for various offenses, mostly involving sex work or uh, uh, other sorts of sexual situations for which they were often the victims. Billie Holiday was sent there in a rape case. She was raped by an older man. This second commitment, but she was sent under those circumstances then as what was called a penitent. So imagine this: a rape victim is now a penitent who is sent to the Good Shepherd not as a child in need of care and guardianship, but as a young woman in need of moral reform. So she stayed there for just a bit less than 2 months for the second commitment, and then left the House of the Good Shepherd. Her mother's father, got her out. And the next several years, she seems to have been traveling back and forth. Her autobiography says that she was in New York by 1927, which would have put her in New York at age 12. We have a picture of her on Coney Island when she's 12 or 13, so that checks out. We don't have any recordings of her until the early 1930s, when she was an older teenager. But it seems that she was singing in New York. She had been singing in Baltimore in waterfront speakeasies. She made her first record in the early 1930s with John Hammond, her legendary promoter, who was very exploited her along with most of his other talent that he represented. She was certainly recognized as a genius very early on. Duke Ellington put her in a film he made, gave her the only singing part in a film he made when she was just 19. And that was the beginning of a now very visible 25-year career. She died at age 44 in 1959. Her childhood circumstances were very difficult, very
Yeah.
gritty. The House of the Good Shepherd story, either what struck me when I started work on this project is that story either gets left out because it's sort of weird. I mean, how do you talk about, Billie Holiday living in a convent? Or
Right.
it is seen as part of a litany of challenges that are shaped Billie Holiday and gave her a particular shape and form to her life and her style. It's not seen as formation in a constructive sense, which I think it is, even though it was awful. I don't dispute that it was very, very difficult. And she said she had nightmares about being locked up. It was a prison, essentially. But it
Yeah.
was also where she had singing instruction. She sang every day. She was exposed to other girls and women who had had similarly difficult experiences, and made of those experiences some kind of life, some kind of
Right.
coherent persona.
Okay. That's really helpful to understand that background of her in that place, and thank you for bringing us up through her life and then to her death. Um, you indicate, Tracy, in your book "Religion Around Billie Holiday," that book focus is not on, and I'm quoting here, focus is not on Holiday's religious practice, and you mentioned a little bit of this a second ago, or expression, but rather on the environing religious conditions to which her genius responded and in which her life and sound took form. So what are the details, Tracy, that we know about those conditions, and then how did they possibly influence her music?
Well, the religion around idea came from a friend of mine who edited a series called Religion Around, and his idea was that we can learn as much about a figure by looking at the religion around that person, and follow that person's life and check in on the religious currents, the religious weather around that person. We can learn a lot about religion
Yeah.
that way, and we can learn a lot about the figures that we are eager to study in that way. I agreed to do the book. Well, I was very intrigued by the idea, but I also thought this would be a good test case for what I always tell my students, which is when they tell me, I'm not religious, so why should I study religion? Why should I care? I say, well, religion is all around you, so you better know something about it. So this was my
Yeah.
chance to demonstrate what it means
Right. Yeah.
to consider religion around a critical figure. So what was the religion around Billie Holiday? Well, certainly although she was Catholic, she was baptized Catholic in the House of the Good Shepherd, and perhaps also earlier, although no records survive of an earlier baptism. But her mother was a very devout Catholic, and so she maintained a Catholic identity, which we can talk about. But she was, as an artist, very much sort of sent into a Black Protestant milieu. And by that, I mean that as a Black woman singer, she joined a sort of a cohort of other musicians who were seen as very much shaped, and in most cases were very much shaped by the Black Baptist Church or the Holiness Church or various African Methodist churches. And
Yeah.
when you look at this was true commercially too, when records Black artists sort of made the record industry because these were the records that people would buy, and that they had record companies knew that they could always make money on what were then called race records. And race records were records made by people who were Black, and they were sold in a very ingenious sort of network of venues, including Pullman car porters, itinerant salesmen. People would follow tent shows around and sell records. And when the race records were marketed, there was not a distinction made between religious records, religious music, or sermons were often recorded and sold as records, and blues or later jazz. So when you sang jazz as a Black woman, you were part of that race record industry.
Mm.
And so all of the expectations and the assumptions and the repertoire of images, of tropes around Black Protestant music clung to Billie Holiday as much as they would have had she not been Catholic, had she been Protestant herself.
Right.
So the sound of Black music in the 20s and 30s when she came up was very much a church-shaped sound. She herself was really a jazz singer. She was often called a blues singer, and she could certainly sing blues. But she was, I think, liked to think of herself and describe herself as a jazz singer. And jazz as a sort of distinctive form was very, very heavily shaped, not only by the Black performers, but by the writers who tended to be Jewish. And so for a whole bunch of interesting reasons, the Jewish songwriting milieu is a very secular milieu, but it's a very secular Jewish milieu. And so that world was one in which she flourished and was a presence, and was certainly shaped by. She herself, as a Black Catholic, was so the subject of what we might think of as a double marginalization, in that as a Catholic, she was not, part of a majority religion in the music world or elsewhere. And then as a Black woman, she experienced all of what goes along with being African American in the Jim Crow South and North. But both Blackness and Catholicism at the time of Billie Holiday's career also make claims to universality. that I think are very important to her. She,
Yeah.
the post World War II sort of movement among what were called Black and Brown nations for a sort of transnational movement of Black and Brown people was important to her. The Catholic Church's universalism was important to her. So that gave her a different sense of
Yeah.
her role, herself. And then, of course, jazz was also a place where lots of performers did their own kind of spiritual seeking, and you have people converting to Islam, to Buddhism, to Scientology, to various forms of DIY religion. So it was a very spiritually charged environment, and I
Yeah.
think all of that had an effect on Billie Holiday.
And then like in the convent, she would sing, right? She as part of church services. And there was I think in your book, in one of your articles or the book, you talk about, I think, a music director there. Um, Perhaps it had some influence. What do we know about that and its influence
Yes,
on
yes.
her? Do we
I
know
want to
much?
be well. I want to be careful because, of
Yeah.
course, we don't have eyewitness. We have a few eyewitness accounts of her life in the House of the Good Shepherd. The woman who was her godmother was interviewed later, and a childhood associate who also spent time in the Good Shepherd was interviewed. And so we have a few, but to figure out what the spiritual practices were there, I just looked at their rule books and their schedules of activities and so
Right.
on. And there was a 6 a.m. mass every day. And they did sing from the Liber Usualis every day. And they had the pastor there was also a vocal director, and he took his vocal direction hat seriously enough to write a book on what it meant to
Right.
as a priest to both sing the chants of the mass and to say the mass. So he was very focused on vocal technique, and he was the chaplain there when Billie Holiday was in the House of the Good Shepherd. So we think of Charlie Parker and the Woodshed, how that was so formative. His brief period of time, subjecting himself to a kind of musical discipline that was also a spiritual discipline. I think for Billie Holiday, I think I'm on relatively firm ground in guessing that this spiritual and musical discipline of daily mass with a spiritual director who was also a vocal director must
Yeah.
have had some effect on her.
Okay.
It was interesting because the nuns at the House of the Good Shepherd and the inmates and the orphan kids, the preservates, and then this class of sisters who were known as Magdalens, they all sang at the mass, even though a directive from the Pope, I think Pius X, said prior to Billie Holiday's arriving at the House of the Shepherd, he made a recommendation that women not be allowed to sing because the chants of the Mass were a part of the liturgy, and only the priest could say the liturgy of the
I see.
Mass, pre-Vatican II. But this was ignored at the House of the Good Shepherd, apparently, because the girls did sing and the sisters did sing. So it was a little bit subversive that they were singing the part of the priest. And this was the choir director or the chaplain's interest in the role of the priest's voice in bringing listeners to a kind of spiritual place, a spiritual plane that they might not have access to otherwise. So
Yeah. Okay. So we don't know for sure, but it seems like there's enough music around her that it could have had some
well,
influence
a
on
couple of
her.
other things. There was daily mass with music, so that's a lot of
Yep.
music.
Yep.
When the Good Shepherd girls were trotted out to give performances, they were brought out to sing for visiting dignitaries in the Baltimore diocese. They gave vocal performances of both sacred music and what was then popular music. So singing was a part of what happened there. And I think that this was, you imagine these places not having a whole lot to offer in the way of extracurriculars, right?
Right.
But because it's a Catholic institution and because the daily mass was central to, and the rituals of the mass and the rituals of Catholicism were central to activity there, the fact that music was part of the mass meant that music was part of the the, the daily curriculum, the daily experience of these Good Shepherd girls.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's move forward here. I noted that somewhere I read that you mentioned Billie prayed to Saint Teresa in times of trouble and continued to say the Rosary in her later life. You said earlier that she was a Catholic and she remained that her whole life, a Catholic, or at least she said that she was Catholic, I guess. What do we know about Billie Holiday's religious life, religious outlook? When she became famous with her music.
We know that her mother continued to attend mass, and she and her mother were reunited in Harlem. They lived together in Harlem, and so she knew that her mother. She described her mother as a mass every Sunday Catholic. She herself had a priest friend until the end of her life, a guy who was the DJ at Boston University and the chaplain. His name was Norman O'Connor, and he had a jazz show, and he was a big founder of the Newport Jazz Festival. So he was known as the jazz priest. They were good friends, and he wrote to her after she recorded her last album and said he thought it was the best one that she had ever recorded. And she was so pleased with this letter, she jotted an angry note on the back of it and sent it to her then estranged husband, who told her she had no more talent. She said, "No, my priest friend says I'm still got it." Her ghostwriter, with whom she collaborated on her autobiography, was also a kind of lapsed Catholic, a gay guy who loved Billie Holiday and loved comparing Catholic stories, what it was like to grow up in this Catholic milieu. And he said to her, when did you start lying in the confessional? And she just thought that was a great question to get at, what was really important to her. She mentioned having an abortion or bringing a miscarriage on through the use of some home remedy. And she said, "No, I didn't. That's not what I lied about. Everyone did that. That wasn't what that wasn't a big deal to me." But she did tell a story about the confessional, which wasn't lying in the confessional so much as it was telling off a priest who she thought was misusing his office. And we don't know the details of it, but she said she stormed out of the confessional and said, "You're a white man and you ain't God." And she said, "I never went back after that." But she did pray. She did. Mary Lou Williams, of course, who was a composer who was a very ardent Catholic, said that Billie Holiday would show her rosary beads when they saw each other at funerals. Then I'm Catholic too. She prayed to Saint Teresa. She seemed to have her devotion to Saint Teresa was partly owing, I think, to the fact that in one of her tenures at the House of the Good Shepherd, she took the name Teresa. She was given the name Teresa, or she chose the name Teresa. This was right around the time that Therese of Lisieux was being canonized, 1925. So it was on the cover of the New York Times. Everyone knew Therese of Lisieux. Billie Holiday modeled herself after Therese in some sense, it seems, and continued to pray to her. And so there was sort of a feminine piety, like her devotion to the Rosary, her devotion to Saint Teresa or Saint Therese. But then she also had she was also very, very, very good friends with this jazz priest. And he said, you just don't have to, she said, they must have had some theological conversation about her life and her, was it okay? Was she still okay as a Catholic? Right. And he said, you can enjoy yourself and still be a good Catholic. We have a forgiving God. And she said, "I wish you were the Pope." So she felt, just somewhat, on the outside of Catholicism, but also aware that there's no real outside to Catholicism if you take that seriously, if you take that teaching seriously. So she was marginal, but also central to it.
Right. You also apply the term Catholic fugitive soul to Billie Holiday, among others, including Martin Scorsese and even Bruce Springsteen. What is that, and what's the significance to her story?
Yeah, this is not my term. It's one that I borrow from the wonderful Catholic historian James Fisher. And he talks about a Catholic lost generation, a mid-century Catholic lost generation. All of his examples are men, but he said, we can identify this in the characters in Martin Scorsese movies, in the characters that Marlon Brando or Mickey Rourke play, in the music of Bruce Springsteen, in the poetry of Jim Carroll, in the life of Jack Kerouac. A sense that there is a religious sensibility that can't easily be plotted on any spectrum from apostasy to devotion. It's sort of not on that, the task is not to identify or disidentify in relation to Catholicism, but to incorporate or internalize a set of Catholic perspectives that are, in some sense, add up to whatever the opposite of the Protestant work ethic is, or, a sense that your people are in the underworld, you're drawn to the underworld, you're drawn to a very unpromising group of losers, thieves, con men, but these are your people, and you keep company with suffering rather than imagining that you can solve it. So there is as Fisher says, borrowing theological language, there's a preferential option for those who suffer, for those who hurt, and your loyalties supersede your obligations to the state, your loyalties to your group, your people, and your approach to evil and injustice is to witness powerfully to injustice, but not to imagine that you have the answer to it or you can solve it. So I love this. I love this idea that Jim Fisher develops, but I don't think men have a lock on this. I think we could put Dorothy Day certainly in that company. We could put Flannery O'Connor in that company. You think of her cast of characters, or her idea that evil is not a problem to be solved; it's a mystery to be endured. Billie Holiday very much in that company. She was drawn always to the marginalized. She took care of people. She ran a kind of soup kitchen. I mean, anyone could go to her apartment and eat. She was apparently a very good cook, and she would give anyone a drink, anyone a meal. She loved when she became wealthy, she loved going down to the waterfront in Baltimore in furs, and these little kids would run up to her and get their grubby hands all over her fur coat, and she just thought that was hilarious. She never she enjoyed her wealth, but she enjoyed sharing it. And she died in very, very straitened circumstances. She never you know got rich. And so that seems to be her. She was very much at home in that place.
Yeah.
I think also at the Good Shepherd, uh, well, two ways we might locate Billie Holiday within that cohort of the sort of unpromising people who are going nowhere, but who do amazing things. In when she was 11, and she was sent to the Good Shepherd on in connection with a rape case. She herself was already singing in speakeasies on the Baltimore waterfront. And these speakeasies, of course, were illegal operations, and they included prostitution. And she herself seems to have been a prostitute at that age. So there was a group of girls who were run by a pimp, and his practice was to give all his girls a black eye. That was like branding them so that you knew who they were. And the girls on the waterfront who were in this guy's orbit, his control, would brag about their black eyes. It was like a badge of honor to be beaten up by this pimp. Now we want to just run and rescue whatever girl walks around with that in her life, in her head. Right. When Billie Holiday ends up in the House of the Good Shepherd, she is subjected to all of the stories of Catholic girls and women whose piety over the ages, beginning in the Middle Ages, is entirely located in their bodies because they don't have access to print. They don't have access to any other form of power. So we read of women who practice mortification, who damage their bodies, who many of them have a sort of arc of sin and redemption. They are concubines or prostitutes, and then they go become hermits and live in a different horrible way. But this notion that your body is what somehow God can use, right? I mean, this is God's material. There's nothing you can do to put yourself outside of the scope of what God can use to bring you and others to a kind of salvation or spiritual clarity. So I think she was always sort of there, and that was true up until the very last day of her life. I think where she died almost unrecognized, where she nearly died unrecognized in a hallway in a hospital where they wouldn't treat her because she was obviously a drug addict. Then a doctor did say, "Oh my goodness, that's Billie Holiday," and they kept her alive for a few weeks. But it wasn't. She did not have a body at 44 that could sustain her any longer.
Wow. Thank you for all that. That's really new things for me to think about, at least. I had not heard of this Catholic fugitive soul idea, and that really introduces quite a interesting thing to think about on the American religious landscape between Protestants and Catholics. So there's a song that she sang called "God Bless the Child." What is the story behind this, and does it reveal anything about religion's role in Billie Holiday's outlook on life and music?
Yeah, when I would tell people I was writing a book about religion and Billie Holiday, sometimes they'd say religion, Billie Holiday. Oh, right. God bless the child. Like there is this one place
Right,
where people say, "Oh, okay,
right,
so there's a connection."
right.
And God bless the child is actually a very, very funny place to think of that connection being salient because she recorded it the sheet music. You can look at the sheet music and it's called a swing spiritual. God bless the child. And it said it's based on an authentic proverb in the Bible. God bless the child that's got his own. So when I said in the NPR piece that this was based on a non-existent Bible verse, I had people writing to me and saying, no, 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 there's the parable of the talents in Matthew. That's sort of in there. Yes, it is. To those that have, more will be given, etc. That's in the song. But there is no proverb that says, God bless the child that's got his own.
Right.
So she's sort of, making up this spiritual. And it has become since then a genuine sacred song. I mean, you hear it sung in sacred choirs all over the world, black and white. It has become not just a secular hymn, but sort of a sacred hymn as well. And the story behind it is really interesting. John Hammond, who was her producer, was himself a blue blood. He was a Vanderbilt on his mother's side. He grew up in like a 30-room mansion in New York. And he prided himself on discovering all of this Black talent and then, of course, making a fortune on the backs of these Black musicians that he represented. So he put Billie Holiday in the studio with Benny Goodman for her first record, paid her literally like $5 or $10, and never paid her well after that. He decided to do a concert at Carnegie Hall in 1938, and then did a sort of second a 2.0 in 1939, and he called it From Spirituals to Swing. And this was going to be Hammond's opus. It was his story of the Black musical tradition in America from spirituals to swing. So it was his his history, his genealogy of Black
Right.
music that starts in churches and then ends up with jazz. Right. So he he found all these people to enact this for him, and it was typical John Hammond. I mean, he put people in and told them what to do and told them what to say and told them what to wear, and it was going to be his case for his own genius, really. So Billie Holiday was going to be in From Spirituals to Swing, but then at the end he said he was not very forthcoming about why he dropped her, but he dropped her. And the story is that what she said publicly was that he just nickel and dimed her. He wasn't going to pay her enough, which I'm sure was true. What he said is that she had become dissolute and was doing drugs, and he couldn't have her in the lineup. Well, everyone in the lineup was doing at least marijuana, probably, so that really was not an answer. But what had happened in the year or two before Spirituals to Swing, which was also the year that God Bless the Child was recorded, 1939, is that Billie Holiday had many, many admirers, male and female. And one of her woman admirers was a relative of John Hammond's, a woman named Louise Crane, who was the poet Elizabeth Bishop's long-term companion, also extremely wealthy. Her family was the Crane paper family. They literally printed money because they made rag paper for the mint. So this woman, like, this is money, right? So she fell in love with Billie Holiday and started to give Billie Holiday lots of, money, favors, furs, diamonds, jewels, the works. So Billie Holiday gave her mother enough money to start a kind of um, a what would you call it? Like an after hours joint in Harlem.
Yeah.
And they made food and they served liquor and they had music, and her mother charged a little bit of admission and made a little money this way, but Billie Holiday gave her the money to start this because she'd got all this money from Louise Crane. Hammond decided that that Billie Holiday was a bad influence on Louise Crane, and was determined to separate them. He got Billie Holiday fired from her gig at Cafe Society, where she had become very famous. He was at that point, I think, really trying to destroy her. She had just recorded Strange Fruit, which he didn't like and didn't want to record. So anyway, she records God Bless the Child and calls it a swing spiritual. She said in her autobiography that the idea came to her, God bless the child that's got his own, when she was taking money from the till at the apartment that she shared with her mother. And her mother said, "Don't take money from the till." And Billie said, "God bless the child that's got his own. Like, I've got my own. And by the way, I got you all this money from Louise Crane, my admirer." So it was sort of like it was a way of trolling John Hammond in a way. The
Right.
Spirituals to Swing concert is a big deal. And then Billie Holiday has this big hit that she calls a swing spiritual. And as a way of saying, I know more about this music than you do. And also letting him know that she didn't need his money, right? That she didn't need his help. And of course, it becomes a big hit and the message in it is one that many people find very powerful. So
Yeah.
interesting backstory.
Yeah, that is. As we conclude, Tracy, do you want to share any lessons or takeaways from religion around Billie Holiday, either in terms of important historical transformations you have noticed, or in terms of helping us better understand our present moment in the American narrative?
Yes, I think I do want to comment on the inclusion of Billie Holiday in the Garden of Heroes, which, as we know, is an idea for a celebration of 250 great Americans. But as a way of generating interest in the Garden of Heroes, school kids across America have been given little biographies of these 250 figures. Billie Holiday is one of them, and I want just briefly to read the biography that kids are being served now about Billie Holiday and to tell you why I think it's incomplete. Here's the last couple of lines. Billie Holiday's success proved that in the United States, your talent and persistence can lead to greatness regardless of your background. Holiday traveled across the country, bringing people together through the power of her unforgettable performances. Holiday was a trailblazer who paved the way for future generations of American singers to express their own unique voices. Her legacy is one of beauty, resilience, and a voice that continues to resonate with the American soul. She remains a shining example of American artistic achievement. And I would say, again, none of that is wrong, but it leaves out what was, I think, extremely important to Billie Holiday, and which goes to this sense of, witnessing injustice, witnessing evil. She made the centerpiece of her career was really a song about lynching, "Strange Fruit," and she refused to regard racism and injustice as something that we had gotten past, that we had gotten beyond. It was always going to be part of the life of any African American person, any African American performer. So the little biography that these students are reading suggests that she transcended all of that injustice. She transcended hardship. She transcended the evil that was dealt to her, and her insistence through her whole life, her whole career, that she was, yes, a survivor, never a victim. She refused to be a victim. She was very resilient, very much a survivor, but she wanted you to know what she had come from, and she wanted you to know what it was like to be a Black person in the American South. And she wanted you to know what it was like to be in a jazz band where you weren't allowed to stay at the hotel where you were singing. And she refused to let any of that go silent. And I think that that is something that hurt her in the end. So this, I think it's somewhat sugar-coated, this version of Billie Holiday that we are promoting now among young people. And while I'm thrilled that she will be in the Garden of Heroes if it's ever built, I think we want to be faithful to her witness, as well as to her talent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. You have the last word, and it's a good one. We have been speaking with Tracy Fessenden, the Steve and Margaret Forster Professor in the School of Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies at Arizona State University, and the author of Religion Around Billie Holiday. Tracy, thank you so much for being with us. This was superb. A particular story, a very particular story of religion in American music. We are all better equipped now, I think, to be better stewards of religion's role in perpetuating the American experiment in self-government.
Thank you, Chris. Wonderful to be with you.
Religion in the American Experience is produced by the private Digital First National Museum of American Religion. Scholarly support is provided by Dr. Lauren Turek and audio and video assistance by Dr. Randall Stevens. The music was composed by Evan Chamberlain.